So it's been kind of out of reach just getting here. It's my first time in 2024 because for the last 6 months, 5 months, 6 months, we've been helping my parents move from their cottage into nursing care. And a big part of that, my parents were historians and kept lots of family history stuff, including a stack of journals that my Amish grandmother, my grandmummy, kept throughout her whole life. So she had a really interesting life. She was married to Sam Meller for 12 years. They weren't able to have children. He had TB, and this is back in the early 1900s, and so they went out west. They went to Pasadena, California. They saw the Rose Bowl parade. Grandma kept track of all these things in her diary. And then Sam ended up dying of TB, and a year later, she married my grandfather, Jonas, who had come from Ohio. He was a widower. He had 3 children and came out from Ohio, and they got married within a year and about 2 weeks. And that's not in the journals because that journal isn't there. And when something isn't there like that, you kind of wonder what it is. And I often wondered about my grandparents. Like, did they actually love each other? I don't know how many of you have wondered about the intimate details of your grandparents' life. But it actually always bothered me. Like, did Grandmummy and Grandpa actually love each other? My grandpa died when my dad was about 1.5 years, so I never got to know him, and I didn't really know much about them. But I had read the journals about traveling with her first husband, Sam, and about her feelings for Sam. And I really wondered, so what were the feelings for my grandfather, Jonas? So my parents donated a number of things to the local historical society there in Kelowna, Iowa. And I'm sitting there in my dad's room in the nursing home, and I'm typing up. I'd say, so Dad, what about this thing? And then I'd type up whatever he said. Dad, what about this thing? I'd type up whatever he said. Dad, what about the journals? And then my 91-year-old dad started talking about this thing that I thought I would never, ever find out about. Do you know how you don't want to appear too interested when somebody starts talking? You just kind of say enough to keep them talking and think like, well, what's gonna come out? So in my conservative Mennonite growing up and in Amish before that for my family, there's one big thing that gets you in trouble with the church. You can probably guess what it is. It's generally not business dealings. It has to do with the relationships between two people that are in love. So it turns out that my grandmother, this widow, who had a farm, about a year after her husband died, her first husband died, this guy shows up from Ohio, and he starts coming to see her. And one night, on a Thursday night, his horse stays in the barnyard all night. And the neighbors were watching, which just really puzzles me because there are no neighbors within a half a mile in either direction. And they went to the ministers. And the ministers came and talked to my grandmummy Lena and grandfather Jonas, who were not married at the time. And yes, they admitted that he had been staying overnight. And I just find that so absolutely wonderful. That these two people, because I don't really have any memories of my grandmother until she was 65 and bent over from hard work and arthritis, that she and my grandfather were in love. And instead of putting them in the band, these wise ministers said, so we're not going to go through that whole band business and all of that and confession in church. You're just going to get married on Sunday. And this was either on Friday or Saturday. So they got married on Sunday, which explains another thing that I always wondered about. His 2 children that were living with Uncle John weren't living with my grandfather Jonas. They came to church on a Sunday morning and found out that their dad was marrying my grandmother. And it's like, why would he have not told his kids about it, like, what kind of man was this guy? And the story continues just a bit. The reason I had never read that story in the journals, because Aunt Katie and Aunt Verna at some point had decided that this story should not be passed down through the generations. So guess what they had done with that one journal? Burned it. And my dear, wonderful dad made sure the story got passed down. And it's not out of reach for all of those generations coming. Thank you.